1973 Constitutional Authoritarianism. In 1965, Ferdinand Marcos was elected president, and in 1967, Philippines Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. Marcos won the election in 1969 in a bid boosted by campaign overspending and use of government funds. Elections of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention were held on November 20, 1970, and the convention began formally in June 1, 1971, with former President Carlos P. Garcia being elected as convention president. Unfortunately, he died and was succeeded by another former president, Diosdado Macapagal. Before the convention finished its work, martial law was declared. Marcos cited growing communist insurgency as reason for the martial law, which has provided for in the 1935 Constitution. Some delegates of the ongoing Constitutional Convention were placed behind bars and others went into hiding or voluntary exile. With Marcos as dictator, the direction of the convention turned, with actions that the president himself dictated some provisions of the Constitution, manipulating the documents to be able to hold on to power for as long as he can. On November 29, 1972, the convention approved its proposed constitution.
The Constitution was supposed to introduce a parliamentary-style government, where legislative power was vested in a unicameral National Assembly, with members being elected to a term of 6 years. The President was to be elected as the symbolic and ceremonial head of state, chosen from the members of the National Assembly. The President would serve a 6-year term and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. Executive power is relegated to the Prime Minister, who is also the head of government and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, who was also to be elected from the National Assembly. President Marcos issued Presidential Decree Number 73 setting the date of plebiscite to ratify or reject the proposed Constitution on November 13, 1973. This plebiscite was postponed later on since Marcos feared that the public might vote to reject the Constitution. Instead of a plebiscite, citizen assemblies were held from January 10 to 15, 1973, where the citizens coming together and voting by hand decided on whether to ratify the Constitution, suspend the convening of the interim National Assembly, continue martial law, and place a moratorium in elections for a period of at least several years. The President on January 17, 1973, issued a proclamation announcing that the proposed Constitution has been ratified by an overwhelming vote of the members of the highly regular citizen assemblies.
The Constitution was amended several times. In 1976, citizen assemblies once again overwhelmingly decided to allow the continuation of martial law, as well as approve the amendments. Ang itiring batasang bansa to substitute for the entire National Assembly, the President to also become the Prime Minister and continue to exercise legislative powers until martial law is lifted and authorize the President to legislate on his own an emergency basis. An overwhelming majority ratify further amendments succeeding. In 1980, the retirement of members of the judiciary was extended 70 years. In 1981, the parliamentary system was formally modified to a French style, semi-presidential system where executive power was restored to the president, who was once again to be directly elected. An executive committee was to be created, composed of the prime minister and 14 others that served as the president's cabinet. And some electoral reforms were instituted. In 1984, the executive committee was abolished and the position of the vice president was restored. After all the amendments introduced, the 1973 Constitution was merely a way for the President to keep executive powers, abolish the Senate, and by no names, never act as a parliamentary system but instead function as an authoritarian presidential system, with all the real power concentrated in the hands of the President with the backing of the Constitution.
The situation in the 1980s has been very turbulent, as Marcos Ama's power discontent has also been regaining. The tide turned swiftly when in August 1983 Benigno Aquino Jr., opposition leader and regarded as the most credible alternative to President Marcos. There was widespread suspicion that the orders to assassinate Aquino came from the top levels of the government and military. Marcos was then forced to hold snap elections a year early and said the elections were marred by widespread fraud. Marcos declared himself winner despite international condemnation. A small group of military rebels attempted to stage a coup, but failed. However, this triggered what came to know as the EDSA People Power Revolution of 1896. 1987 Constitution after martial law. President Corazon Aquino's government had three options regarding the Constitution: revert to the 1935 Constitution, retain the 1973 Constitution, and be granted the power to make reforms, or start anew and break from the vestiges of a disgraced dictatorship. They decided to make a new constitution today, according to the President herself, should be truly reflective of the aspiration and ideals of the Filipino people. In March 1986, President Aquino proclaimed a transitional commission to last for a year, while a constitutional commission drafted a permanent constitution. This transitional constitution, called the Freedom Constitution, maintained many provisions that old made, including in rewriting form the presidential right to rule by decree. In 1986, a constitutional convention was created, composed of 48 members appointed by President Aquino from varied backgrounds and representations. The convention drew up a permanent constitution, largely restoring the setup abolished by Marcos in 1972, but with new ways to keep the president in check, a reaction to the experience of Marcos' rule. A new constitution was officially adopted on February 2, 1987. The Constitution of the Philippines coming with a preamble, followed by the 18 self-contained articles. So, it lays the foundation for the Philippines as a democratic republican state, affirming that the sovereignty resides within the people. All governmental authority stems from them. It allocates governmental power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government. The executive branch is headed by the President and his cabinet, whom he appoints. The President is the head of the state and the chief executive, but his power is limited by the significant check from the two other co-equal branches of government, especially during time of emergency. In case of national emergency, the President may declare martial law, but not larger than a period of 60 days. Congress, through a majority vote, can revoke this decision or extend it for a period that they determine. Supreme Court may also review the declaration of martial law and decide if there were sufficient justifying facts for the act. President and the Vice President are elected at large by a direct vote, serving a single 6-year term.
The legislative power resides in a Congress divided into two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The 24 senators are elected at large by popular vote and can serve no more than 2 consecutive 6-year terms. The House is composed of district representatives representing a particular geographic area and make up around 80% of the total number of representatives. There are 234 legislative districts in the Philippines that elect their representatives to serve 3-year terms. The 1987 Constitution created a partyless system to provide spaces for the participation of underrepresented community, sectors, or groups. Partyless representatives may fill up not more than 20% of the seats in the House. But the power of legislation, however, is also subject to an executive check as the President retains the power of veto or step-up.
The Philippine court system is vested with the power of the judiciary and is composed of Supreme Court and lower courts as created by law. The Supreme Court is a 15-member court appointed by the President without the need to be confirmed by Congress. The appointment the President makes, however, is limited to a list of nominees provided by a constitutionally specified judicial and bar council. The Supreme Court justices may hear and appeal any cases dealing with the constitutionality of any law, treaty, or decree of the government, cases where questions of jurisdiction or judicial error are concerned, or cases where the penalty is sufficiently grave. It may also exercise original jurisdiction over cases involving government or international officials. The Supreme Court also is charged with overseeing the functioning and administration of the lower courts and their personnel.
The Constitutional also established 3 independent constitutional commissions: are Civil Service Commission, Commission on Elections, and Commission on Audit. The Civil Service Commission, or the CEC, is the central personnel agency of the Philippine government. One of the 3 independent constitutional commission with adjudicative responsibility in the national government structure, it is also tasked to render final arbitration and dispatch and personal actions in civil service matters. According to Article 9C, Section 2 of the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines, the Commission on Elections, or the COMELEC, are to enforce and administer all laws and regulations relative to the conduct of an election, decide except those involving the right to vote. The Commission on Audit is a creation of the 1973 Constitution, which examines all funds, transactions, and property accounts of the government and its agencies.
The 1987 Constitution provides for 3 ways by which the Constitution can be amended, all requiring ratification by a majority vote in a national referendum. These modes are Constituent Assembly, a People's Initiative, or a Constitutional Convention. Using these modes, there were efforts to amend or change the 1987 Constitution, starting with the presidency of Fidel V. Ramos, who succeeded Corazon Aquino. The first attempt was in 1995 when the Secretary of National Security Council, Jose Almonte, drafted a constitution, but it was exposed to the media and it never prospered. The second effort happened in 1997 when a group called Prima hoped to gather signatures from voters to change the constitution through a people's initiative. Many were against this, including the Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, who brought the issue to court and won, with the Supreme Court judging that a people's initiative cannot push through without a enabling law. The succeeding President Jose Ejercito Estrada formed a study commission to investigate the issues surrounding character change, focusing on the economic and judiciary provision of the Constitution. This effort was also blocked by different entities. After President Estrada was replaced by another people power and succeeded by his Vice President, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, then House Speaker Jose de Benicia endorsed constitutional change through a constituent assembly, which initials a two-third vote of the House to propose amendments or revision the Constitution.
This initiative was also not successful since the term of President Arroyo was marred with controversy and scandal, including the possibility of Arroyo extending her term as president, which the Constitution does not allow. The administration of the succeeding President, Benigno III, had no more interest in charter change, except those emanating from different members of Congress, including the Speaker of the House, Feliciano Belmonte Jr., who aimed to introduce amendments to the Constitution that concern economic provisions that aims toward liberation. This effort did not see the light of today. It was outsourced the populism. President Rodrigo Duterte won the 2016 presidential election in a campaign campaigning on law and order, proposing to reduce crime by killing tens of thousands of criminals. He also is a known advocate of federalism, a proud mode of government combining a central or federal government with regional governments in a single political system. This advocacy is a part and influence of his background, being a local leader in Mindanao that has been mired in poverty and violence for decades. On 7 December 2016, President Duterte signed the executive order creating a consultative committee to review the 1987 Constitution.